Hello there. Welcome to the channel. This is Nerd.World, where I explore all things nerdy, all things sci-fi, all things fantasy, anything, quite frankly, that I feel like that I think is awesome. And today's awesome story is the profile of Commander Jonathan Archer of the ISS Enterprise, the Mirror Universe counterpart of Captain Jonathan Archer. This was an ambitious and cruel and vicious Terran officer and loyal-ish servant of the Empire, at least loyal from his own point of view. Before we get started, please like, share, subscribe, comment down below, as it all helps the channel, and I'm still trying to grow this channel. There is a full playlist of other Terran videos as well as other Star Trek videos. In fact, I think I have 3 separate playlists of Star Trek videos on this channel, as well as a section of Star Trek themed videos on my other channel, Nerd.World Films. And I also have another channel, Nerd.World History. They're linked down below. I'm not going to get into them now. That said, let's get started on Commander Jonathan Archer. Now, the Terrans, they'd always been an aggressive people, always looking for a fight, with a long history of warfare and pride in that warfare. Archer was no exception to this particular rule, and, as we'll explore, was perhaps a little too Terran to be in command of a starship or the Terran Empire. Archer was the executive officer under Captain Maxwell Forrest, commanding officer of the ISS Enterprise, the flagship of the Imperial Starfleet. He was a decorated and seasoned veteran officer of multiple campaigns across the Terran Empire against the Klingons, the Xindi, the Nausicaans, and others, and had some, it's implied, prior experience with the Gorn, although we'll get to that in a minute. Archer, despite a lot of things, was actually a highly intelligent officer, although Captain Forrest would state he lacked ambition, which is why he'd always trusted him as his first officer. But like many Terrans, he did have ambition, and when he sensed that maybe not so much the opportunity to take command had come along, but that his commanding officer was not acting in the best interest of the Terran Empire, he decided to act under what he thought was the right pretext for a vague mutiny. He didn't inherently want to take command away from Forrest. He didn't inherently want to take over the Enterprise necessarily. He wanted his own command, whether that was the Enterprise or another ship. He wanted his own command. He felt he was ready for it, and he felt he deserved it, and Forrest, although it clearly promoted him through the ranks to commander, wasn't as willing to recommend him for command in general. And other admirals who, whether it was true or not, but Archer believed that they conspired against him to keep him away from the captain's chair. They were fine with him being first officer, but for reasons that are never explained, or reasons that maybe just in his head, they were not willing to do it. It could be because he was kind of insane. It could be, but although he was an aggressive and effective soldier, he wasn't necessarily command material. The difference in command style between him and Forrest was very apparent, with Forrest being much more reserved, authoritative, and generally more logical in his command style. Archer was all about aggression and action, and that kind of command style often leads to what happens: the destruction of your ship and the loss of your command. But all the same, Archer and a few loyal officers aboard the ship moved against Forrest because he had information about what would turn out to be a Federation starship, which had been pulled into this dimension by the Tholians, but it was also from 100 years in the future. Otherwise, one ship would have made no real difference to the Terrans. They were just going to leave it, deal with the problem later. But this vessel being 100 years in the future meant it had all kinds of technology that could help them win the current war against the rebellion, which the Terrans were keeping under wraps, but they were losing. Forrest dismissed this information as unreliable intelligence and not worth investigating in the middle of a war. If they weren't in the middle of a war, fine, but they were in the middle of a conflict. They didn't have time, as far as he was concerned, and he didn't bother to report it to Starfleet Command. Admiral Black of Starfleet Command, though, agreed with Archer and authorized the mission after Archer seized command of the Enterprise and locked up Captain Forrest. Archer would lock the Enterprise on course for Tholian space, preventing Forrest from turning around and forcing him to undertake the mission. Forrest would then decide that Archer's treachery couldn't be tolerated and he had to be eliminated. And although he couldn't do this through any official process or any official means, as Archer had acted within his purview as first officer and a Terran Imperial soldier, he knew that now the line in the sand had been drawn. It was only a matter of time before he'd have a knife in his back at some point in the future, unless he either got Archer shipped off to another starship, which was unlikely to happen as no other captain would take him now, or promote him, which was again unlikely. You're not going to promote someone that turned on you, or, as a good Terran does, kill him. But again, he couldn't do this officially, so it was, he whispered to T'Pol, Archer wasn't to return from the away mission to the USS Defiant. He was to have an accident, or if he was to happen to get into a firefight with the Tholians, maybe you just leave him alone and he let the Tholians take care of him. This, however, was not to be, as the Tholians were able to detect the Enterprise and they destroyed it, leaving Archer and a few of the crew who'd managed to make it to the escape pods as well as his away team aboard the USS Defiant. He then used the Defiant, once they managed to get control of it, to destroy the Tholian base, many of the Tholian ships, get the vessel to warp and rendezvous with the Terran assault fleet the Enterprise had originally been tasked to do, and then use it to destroy most of the Rebel fleet, only sparing one Rebel ship to allow it to go away and sow seeds of fear and anguish over what had just happened at this battle, to show that the Terrans were not down and out yet. He then assassinated Admiral Black as he heard voices in his head telling him basically, the Admiral's going to take credit for your work, he's going to take credit for the discovery of the Defiant, he's not going to put you in charge, he's going to present it to the Emperor. Perhaps a more rational officer like Forrest would have seen it, yeah, maybe the Admiral will take credit for some of my work, but the Admiral will remember what I've done. He's going to want loyal officers like me in place, and that's how you get promoted, that's how you get put in charge. You're a useful person to the Admiral then. The Admiral, he might not give you command of the Defiant, but maybe you would have got command of another ship. They're in the middle of a war, as the Admiral put it, there wasn't a ship available, but there would be soon. And Archer no longer had a captain, he was a senior commanding officer of a crew with no ship. In all probability, he was looking at getting a command rank. He'd just made an Admiral very happy, and he'd made an Admiral's career. If he'd have just allowed Admiral Black to do what an Admiral likely in the Terran Empire does, he would have shared at least some of the glory. After all, it was Admiral Black that authorized the mission in the first place. He clearly took some interest in what Archer was saying and doing as an officer. Here was his real opportunity, the one opportunity he really had to earn promotion and earn that command he had been seeking. But instead, he kept comparing himself to his Prime Universe, or from his point of view, Mirror Universe counterpart, who was a Federation officer who went on to be not only a captain of the Enterprise from the outset, but also an admiral, eventually even president of the Federation, and having planets named after him. Commander Archer found this abhorrent, but on the other hand, you've got to look at, again, Forrest's perspective. When the NX-01 in the Prime Universe was launched, Maxwell Forrest was an admiral, not a captain. In this universe, he was a captain, not an admiral. Everyone seemed to be about a step behind their Prime Universe counterparts. And that's nothing to be ashamed of. He'd still achieved a considerable rank within the Empire. But being a Terran, he decided, I could do this better. The Empire's corrupt. So, taking command of the ISS Avenger along with the Defiant, the two vessels set a course for Earth to force a surrender of the Imperial throne and install Archer himself as the head of the Empire. He would use the Defiant and its technology to revitalize Starfleet, push down the rebellion, probably lay waste to Vulcan, as he had a particular streak of racism towards Vulcans, and blame them for a lot of the problems, as they were one of the races behind the rebellion. He would likely have decimated their population at least. But this led again to a rebellion against him, as violence begets violence. Archer was too aggressive as an officer. The Empire needed captains like Forrest, and even like Admiral Black, who were a bit more restrained, controlled, and thoughtful, and actually thought more than 2 steps ahead of where they were. Archer was a short-sighted officer who didn't realize the dangers that were right next to him. Other, more intelligent, more ambitious, more patient people would take control of his ship from him, and either at the end he was either poisoned and killed, or poisoned more likely and simply incapacitated. He may have survived, but he would likely have been used as an example to the rest of Starfleet as what happens to a treacherous officer, and probably spent years in an agony booth before being decapitated or something, or thrown out of an airlock maybe, or publicly executed. and his head stuck on a spike outside the Imperial Palace on Earth. Well, Emperor Sato rose to become one of the most powerful and long-lasting emperors in the Terran history. And it shows the distinction. He was too aggressive. This is probably the reason he didn't achieve command. That was great as a commanding officer underneath a captain, and the captain would say, these officers they're lazy, deal with it, and he'd go up and he'd flog them and he'd give them a kicking and go, I catch you again doing this, it's a week in the agony booth for you, you get your shit together, yeah? Or it's like, board that ship, capture its crew, steal the loot. Yes sir, right away sir, we're over there, and they slaughter everyone on board and steal all the loot. Great. As an officer and a soldier in command of troops, being that level of aggressive was great, but when you're not in a fight, constantly looking for one and being that paranoid and aggressive is not necessarily a good foundation for a commanding officer, and that was one of Archer's biggest weaknesses and problems. And it ultimately led to his own downfall, but also the rise of a far superior emperor and likely a much stronger Terran empire. So indirectly he did get what he wanted. He was probably right, as others agreed, that there was very likely a lot of corruption at the head of the Terran Empire at this point, and actually replacing those corrupt officials and getting rid of or at least some of the Senate, particularly the Emperor, was probably going to be quite useful. Get rid of the Imperial bloodline, as others stated there was a bit too much inbreeding going on. Get rid of them, start again, and have a stronger, more organized empire as a result. So he may have been correct in his assessment, but he wasn't the right man for the job. But it led to the right woman taking the throne. So there we have it, the canonical information we have on Commander Jonathan Archer, or Captain Archer as he liked to call himself, with ambitions and delusions of grandeur to become the Emperor of the Terran Empire, a feat which he would not accomplish in his lifetime. I hope you liked that video. Please like, share, subscribe, comment down below. Tell me what you think of Archer. You want me to do more of these breaking down others of the crew of the NX-01? Because I'm probably going to, as those episodes of In a Mirror Darkly Parts 1 and 2 from Enterprise are two of my favourite episodes from Star Trek ever, that are right up there with the recent episodes of Terra Firma Parts 1 and 2 from Season 3 of Discovery, which were like, to me, like sleeper hits. They were fantastic and I really liked them. That said, I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.